If you've owned an average Brisbane house for the last 5 years, congratulations. You've probably made over $500,000 without lifting a finger. And the crazy part is, almost no one saw this coming. 5 years ago, Brisbane was Australia's affordable big city. Now, it's overtaken Melbourne. So how did that happen? And why is this all quietly starting to go into reverse? If we rewind to the starting line in the 2010s, the Australian property market all kind of moved roughly in formation. Melbourne and Sydney led, and the mid-sized capitals, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, were the affordable cousins. And everyone just assumed that Melbourne and Sydney would continue to outperform the rest of the country forever. Or at least that was the general consensus. In early 2020, Melbourne was the second most expensive property market in all of Australia. In contrast, Brisbane's median house price hadn't even cracked $1 million. And Perth had spent a decade going sideways after the last mining boom ended. If you had asked anyone which markets were going to double in the next 5 years, no one was betting on Perth and Brisbane. And then the pandemic hit, and that formation fell apart. And here's the scorecard from just before COVID until now. Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, more than doubled. Sydney managed around 46%, and Melbourne brought up the rear with a lowly 22%. But the percentages it is so easy to nod along with, so let's talk about real dollars. In Brisbane, a doubling means your typical home went up by around about $500,000. Break that number down. That's roughly $100,000 in housing value every year, without renovating, without adding an extra room, without doing anything. It's all simply because you happen to own the right home at the right time in the right city. And this all sounds fantastic if you happen to already be an owner. But if you're one of those unfortunate people that was on the fringe trying to buy, it's kind of downright tragic. Let me explain. A couple who couldn't afford to buy in 2020 are now bidding against those who now have $500,000 of additional equity to play with. That right there is how booms feed themselves. Owners get richer, their equity grows, they can borrow more, and when it comes time to upgrade, they can easily outbid first home buyers, and that just pushes up prices even further. So why Brisbane in particular? I mean, apart from the sunshine and the Bundaberg. This wasn't one cause, it was three causes, all perfectly colliding to create a perfect housing superstorm. When you could suddenly work from anywhere, a lot of people looked at Melbourne and Sydney and just went, why am I still here? The allure of significantly cheaper housing in Brisbane and significantly better weather, particularly if you're in Melbourne, it's a hard business case to knock back. And the evidence on that front is kind of damning. Brisbane was just a magnet for people, particularly from the East Coast. In fact, Brisbane took more interstate movers than any other city or state in the country. And guess what? All those people all need somewhere to live. The laws of supply and demand will tell you how the rest of that story goes. The next is the big one. The homes just weren't there. When a population is growing faster than you can house it or build houses to house them, it only pushes prices in one direction, and that's up. This is the big one. Population was growing faster than we could build more homes. Building collapses, supply shortages, labour shortages, and sky-high construction costs just meant the supply pipeline could never keep up. When a wave of demand hits a city that can't build fast enough, there's only one release valve: price. Brisbane was simply cheaper to begin with, so prices had a lot further to go before buyers started tapping out. The 2032 Olympics probably added some longer-term consumer confidence into the market, but let's be real, it's not the main driver here. The real engine was migration, hitting a wall of no supply in a city that still had room to move on price. Now here's the part that's not in most of the headlines yet. That two-speed market, it's flipping. The return of higher interest rates has limited how much people can borrow. That, coupled with the capital gains and negative gearing changes passed by the government, has limited investor appetite. Affordability is now the worst on record nationally. Servicing a new mortgage typically eats around 45% of a household's income. In Sydney, a staggering 68%. And the market's responded. Sydney and Melbourne aren't just slowing, they're falling. both now sitting below their previous peaks. And even the champions are starting to slow down. Perth and Brisbane are still at record highs, but their monthly growth has collapsed from 2% a month to just a few tenths. The engine that drove this whole divergence thing is starting to run out of fuel. So what do you do with all this? Here's 3 takeaways. The first mistake is assuming that Australia only has one property market. It doesn't. There are 8 different capital city markets, all moving at different speeds in different directions, all being influenced by slightly different market factors. There is not a single national headline that is going to tell you everything about what's happening in the Australian property sector. It's not just doom, gloom, and boom. Second, the affordability squeeze is now doing the work that interest rates used to do. In Brisbane, today, a buyer needs about $17,000 of additional household income compared to January just to service the same mortgage. Prices don't have to crash for a city to become unreachable. The deposit and repayments do that on their own. And that's the quiet tragedy of a boom. It doesn't lock people out with a crash, it locks people out with success. Everyone's record high is someone else's closing door. And third, the cities that were the safe, affordable options, Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, they're the ones that have been repriced the hardest. And the market's still got some psychological adjustments to do to sort of shake that tag that those markets are affordable, because they're not anymore. That thinking's from 3+ years ago. That's the honest version of how Brisbane got so expensive and why the map's being redrawn again right now. Here's the thing to take away though. The next city to boom probably isn't making headlines right now. And chances are, by the time it does, whether you're a buyer, investor, or whatever, you've probably missed the boat.